The Rings of Power was disappointing, to say the least. With an average audience score of 23% on Metacritic and 38% on Rotten Tomatoes, I think we can conclusively say that the series was an absolute failure. And it pains me to say that the future doesn't look much brighter. So how did The Rings of Power go from one of the most anticipated fantasy series of this decade to one of its most resounding disappointments? In this video, we are going to take a look at where it went wrong for The Rings of Power and what this means for future Tolkien productions by Amazon. In November of 2017, Amazon bought the television rights for The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings and its appendices from the Tolkien estate. Remember this little fact, it's going to be very important later on in the video. After their purchase, Amazon made a commitment that they would make a 5-season series with a production value of at least $1 billion. This would make The Rings of Power the most expensive television series ever made. Me, and almost everyone I knew, was hyped. The Lord of the Rings trilogy are still considered to be among the best movies ever made by many, including myself. The 3 Hobbit movies that came after were not on the same level as the original, but still highly entertaining. The combination of finally returning to Middle-earth and the highest budget for a television production ever made expectations soar to unprecedented levels. And on the 7th of March 2019, these expectations became even higher. Because on this day, the official Twitter account of The Rings of Power posted this tweet with a map of Middle-earth. And on this map is the island kingdom of Númenor. We were going to see the second age of Middle-earth on television for the very first time. The hype was real. Now there were some hiccups on the way to the eventual premiere of the series. There were hobbits in the trailers and sneak peeks, which certainly played no part in any story in the second age that Tolkien ever wrote. And The Rings of Power suffered from the at this point almost customary, politically influenced casting choices. But at least that seemed to be minimal, not unlike other major fantasy series. All in all, morale was high leading up to the 1st of September 2022. I personally didn't watch the series immediately when it premiered. I was reading the Silmarillion around that time and I wanted to finish it before starting The Rings of Power to truly get an authentic Tolkien experience. What I heard around me definitely wasn't positive, but I like to make up my own mind and I thought, how bad could it be? Well, it was a disaster. Bad writing, bad acting, bad casting, a general lack of character development and just an awful story overall. And that's just a general review of Season 1, not taking into account that this is supposed to be an adaptation of one of Tolkien's stories. Because that is the major issue here, in my opinion at least. The Rings of Power has barely anything to do with Tolkien's stories. It uses the names and the locations which we all know and love, but besides that, there's little to no connection with Tolkien's works. So why is that? Is it just a case of bad writing? A writing team that thought they could do it better than the original source material, as we've seen happening many times over the last years? Well, bad writing could be a factor here, but it's not the root of the problem. Because the root of the problem is a copyright issue. Let's go back to November 2017. Amazon bought the rights to The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings and its appendices. Which is a strange acquisition when you think about it. Both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings had already been made into highly successful movies. You would have to be especially brave or especially stupid to try and remake one of these trilogies. And if you are going to make a series centered in the second age of Middle-earth, you could really do with some books that actually tell stories about this age. The Fall of Númenor and the Silmarillion come to mind. But the rights to these books have never been sold. And it may be that they never will be sold. And that's where the appendices come in. At the very end of A Return of the King there are 6 appendices, containing over 150 pages of extra information. Summarized histories of the kingdoms of Númenor, Gondor and Arnor, a quick origin story for the dwarves, the most important dates and events of the second and third age. These appendices are quite a necessity for anyone reading a Tolkien book, because Tolkien likes to throw around a lot of events and names in his stories. And considering that most characters are known by multiple names, Aragorn has 10 for example, and that Tolkien doesn't always feel the need to elaborate on names and events that are mentioned, these appendices are a godsend. And apparently, Amazon thought the same. Because when they bought the rights to these books, they also bought the right to use every name and event they could find in the appendices, which meant that they now had the means to make a story that at least resembles the Second Age of Middle-earth. And this is the reason that the Rings of Power is a story which uses the characters and locations we know from the books, but tells a totally different story. Because Amazon does not have the rights to tell the full story, as is written down in, for example, the Silmarillion, but they were allowed to use the major outlines and most important names. They just had to fill in the blanks themselves. Imagine it like this. You're back at school and you haven't studied for a test. Your friend did study, and he made a summary for the chapters you are tested on. You buy his summary, and that's all the information you can use to make the test. Even if you do remember something from the chapters that was not in the summary, you are not allowed to use it in the test. And that's basically how the Rings of Power was made. To give you some examples, the names of Elrond, Gil-galad and Galadriel are only used in passing in the appendices. The Silmarillion and other books tell their full stories from the Second Age, but Amazon is not allowed to use those stories. They can use their names and characters, however, and make their own story. When you really get down to it, the Rings of Power is the most expensive fanfiction that was ever made. And that was not what a lot of real Tolkien fans signed up for. But if you like this video, you can sign up to this channel. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, so if you're enjoying the video, please leave a like for the algorithm and subscribe to the channel. Putting the negativity aside for now, let's ask the important question. What does this mean for the future? For what we can see now, we have 4 seasons of the Rings of Power and a brand new Lord of the Rings MMORPG in the pipeline. If they are going to be made in the same way as Season 1 of the Rings of Power, the future looks very bleak. But a lot of what Amazon can and can't do is dependent on the Tolkien estate. And the Tolkien estate has been subject to quite some changes over the last 3 years, which can be either a good or a bad thing for the future of these projects. Realistically, I think we have to give up on the remaining seasons of the Rings of Power and be moderately hopeful for the Lord of the Rings MMO. But only time will tell. Because to really delve into the future of these projects, we would have to dive into the inner workings of the Tolkien estate, which really warrants a video on its own. So be sure to look forward to that one. I am very curious about your expectations towards future Amazon Tolkien projects. What did you think about Season 1 of the Rings of Power? And are you still going to watch Season 2? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you all very much for watching. See you next time.